Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Sunday Messages. In all honesty, I didn't know exactly what I was going to title this episode. I had a few different ideas, but here's the gist of what is very alive for many people, and this is something that has been alive in a very significant way. I can only speak for the US, though. I don't actually think this is as palpable in other countries, but at least in the US, it definitely is. I know that there are echoes of it elsewhere, but it's thick in the US. It's extremely thick. And this has been brewing for years. I would say I really started to see a shift personally around 2010. I think it really started to get out of control around 2015. We all know what happened in 2016 and people lost their shit. And then it just turned into mania. And what I really want to touch on, getting back to what do I even title this episode? I was thinking about right now, this is a time where separation is at an all-time high. You have so many different fragments and categories to break people down into that it just divides everyone further and further and further and further and further. We get really far away from compassion and empathy and a collective nature when everything is broken down into being pro or anti anything. The biggest misconception, or a couple of the biggest misconceptions, are one, that any of this is solved with the mind or information. The issues that we're facing are not solved with the mental body. They're just not. And the reason for that is that we now have so much more information than we've ever had access to in the history of humankind. Truly. Your phone, whatever you're listening to this podcast on, holds so much information, so much mental information, to the point where it's actually detrimental. It is in such excess that people are having a hard time pruning their own mind. It's just fill. And then they think that they will exude change from that place. That's not where change happens. The second aspect of this that's really getting in the way for many people, and I would say is one of the most difficult things about being alive right now, is the level of self-righteousness that exists collectively. Man, people's egos are just so in the driver's seat to the point where people are actually preventing themselves from evolving. Now, of course, you can't truly stop evolution. Like just from an energetic standpoint, it can't be done. People are going to evolve. But what's happening right now is people are slowing way down. And it's this concept that's super alive. This idea that you have to be pro and anti on every issue. You have to fall into one of those black or white spaces. You have to bind yourself to a particular movement or ideology or perspective. And it doesn't matter what it is. It's now leaked into almost everything. A really good example of this would be anything related to identity. Your race, your culture, your geographical location, your sexual orientation, your sexual identity, your gender identity, anything that falls into self-concept has now become a battlefield, essentially. People argue over labels, what people can and can't say, so on and so forth, to the point where the message has been lost in the mess. The heart of these issues have been completely lost in the mind. There's no pulse on them anymore. It's just fighting for the sake of fighting. being pro or anti just for the sake of, appealing to a specific group of people, making sure you don't get canceled if you say something bad or wrong or politically incorrect or something that's gonna upset the keyboard warriors who are gonna come after your livelihood. And so you have to pick. You have to pick a side. You can no longer have any type of nuanced discussion. Your perspective cannot evolve over time. You're not allowed to change your mind. It's extremely authoritarian. The reason why this is so tricky is because of the two things that I mentioned before. Is that, I don't want to say everyone, but the way that the internet has shaped people's minds is so that they believe that they are right all the time, that they're always right, that there isn't any room for diversity. There's no more gray area in any of this. So the problem, when you combine the self-righteousness that's alive and well, and you combine the overflowing amount of information that everyone has access to. And to be clear, I'm not interested in limiting the scope of information. I would never, ever, ever say we should have less information or that people should be censored because we can't handle it. I don't agree with any of that. I just think this is new for humanity. And as a result, people don't know how to manage it that well. That's all I'm suggesting. So when we come from a self-righteous perspective, we can all do this. I'm not saying, oh, you people are out there being self-righteous. I can fall into this ego trap just as easily as anyone else. I'm not exempt. The only thing that I can really do is catch myself on it and be aware of when that rises up within me, when I'm really committed or feeling like I'm digging my heels in, and when I have the sensation of being ultimately right. When you look at what everyone is doing at the same time, let's say you're completely unconscious and you have your perspective and you think you know it all. You know everything. You have all the information. You've scoured the internet for everything and you've sought out and cherry-picked every bit of information that confirms what you believe to be truth. What people are forgetting is that there's a lot of people on Earth that are also doing that. As a matter of fact, there is someone on Earth right now with the opposite extreme perspective of you who has just as much data, just as much evidence, who has just as many cherry-picked pieces of information that have been scoured from online or books or whatever. That's always going to exist. So this idea that you can win a battle with the mind is just absurd. That you're going to be able to win it with information. You will not be able to win anything with information in this century. Moving forward with the evolution of technology, this is no longer an information game. That used to be the case. That's an old paradigm. It's extremely outdated. But now it's available to anyone. You can make a case, you can build a case for any type of truth that you want. There's no limits on that. It's infinite. There are infinite truths that can be backed by infinite pieces of information. And if you go out there and you look for it, you're gonna find it. Because that's how the law of attraction works, is whatever you focus on, you're gonna get more of, period. Now, this wasn't the case in terms of the mental body and information way, way, way back in history. Information at a certain point was extremely powerful, highly coveted, highly valuable. It was for the elites, essentially, getting education and information. Now, something like information is cheap. It's cheap because everyone has access to it. Anyone can put it out online. pretty much everyone has, rudimentary basic education. That's not something that is highly coveted anymore. So people who come from the headspace of being pro and anti and needing to fall into that and argue with information, like information's going to do jack shit. Information isn't going to do anything right now. In this current time and space, worthless. Worthless, in my book at least, because of all of the reasons that I've just said. You've got too many things that are causing interference with it. You've got too much of it. It's overwhelming amounts of information to the point where you can justify anything. You can find a story, an anecdote, information for anything. So you have very, very primitive beings on Earth right now. Typically, you might see them online just endlessly arguing with each other and trying to appeal with information. And while it may not feel like it in the moment, this is caveman talk. And of course, I'm not saying this to belittle people who are still doing this, but I'm just saying this is why people are not evolving the conversation and evolving perspectives, and humanity isn't moving forward, because in the world where information is at your disposal in any moment, this becomes archaic. This is old. You're not actually on the leading edge of anything just because you can pull some information. Nobody gives a fuck about your information. Nobody cares. And this is what's getting lost a lot of the time in these dynamics, in these conversations with people when they come together and they try to argue with the mind. This is old. This is not going to win over the hearts and minds of people, and it's certainly not going to affect any type of substantial change. What I'm personally seeing happen with this insatiable need from people to be pro or anti, again, pick an issue, whatever issue, fill in the blank. There's a gazillion options to choose from. But it's applying an archaic style of implementing change and activating change within others and trying to stick it onto the collective of 2021. It's never going to happen. It's not. Because the way that we work with each other, we communicate with each other, has rapidly evolved already. The information we have access to has rapidly evolved already. The information holders are not the end-all be-all source of truth anymore. So if you're sitting around and collecting information, you're more like a librarian than anything else. What are you going to do with all that information that already exists on the internet? You going to tell people about it? And when you take this behavior of, like, let's say, stockpiling information, getting into gridlock with your perspective, and then feeling self-righteous enough to actually weaponize that against other people and get them to conform from a mental space, you're losing. You've already lost. It's done. Like, you're not going anywhere. Just go ahead and drop your sword. Because the only thing that you're doing is you're burning energy. You're not changing anyone's mind. And you're filling your body with negative emotion more than likely, which is going to be extremely taxing and stressful on you personally. So this just is not a good strategy. And this is why, people are getting, they're breaking out in tribes, they're fighting each other and going nowhere. There's absolutely no evolution, no overlap. It's just scurrying rats fighting over crumbs. Crumbs of, I proved a point, or I had this information that they didn't have. Crumbs. Nothing. Worthless. That's what's happening right now. So let's break down the energetics. When you fight against something, again, pick an issue, insert a topic. If you're against anything, you're going to make it bigger automatically. Why? Because you are plugging in your power source to that thing. What I want you to visualize is that you have two different targets out in front of you, and you are holding a bow and arrow, and you have one arrow. Now, you have a choice of which target you hit, but you can't hit them both. You can only aim at one, and you can only hit one. So let's say there's a red target and a green target. If you say, I'm anti-red, you're still going to hit the red target. So in order to get off of the red target, you have to aim at the green. You do not have the ability to focus on the red target and hit the green one. It can't be done. And this is how energy works. This is why war doesn't work. The war on terror, the war on drugs, the war on this, the war on whatever is always ineffective. How long has the war on drugs been going on? And there's record-breaking amounts of overdoses that happened last year. That's not a coincidence. That's because people are not focusing on what the opposite would be, which is people having healed nervous systems and healthy relationships to substances. That's a completely different energetic stream and energetic target that you would be aiming at. But because everyone is focused on addiction and drug abuse and crime, that's what grows. So when we're in this, you have to be extremely crisp and clear about where your energy is going. And if the word anti is out in front, I can tell you right now, you're already moving in the wrong direction. I understand people's desires and intentions, but typically anti has a certain level of hostility or resistance backing it. And resistance, like creating a fight out of something, is what grows it. That stimulates everything in the opposite direction that you want to go. So this is why it's just ineffective from an energetic standpoint. If you actually want to cultivate change, you have to be clear in the direction that your energy is flowing and what the intention and energy is behind it. So whereas before in history, it made sense to approach things from the mental body, from information, from an educational standpoint, that made sense. In 2021, it does not. We are now in the time of energetic embodiment being what propels things forward. When it comes to what will actually create change, true change in outcome, in the experience of others, embodiment is the focus. The only way to, well, I shouldn't say the only way, but the fastest, most effective, and most powerful way to affect change is through embodiment. I'm sure you can imagine the difference between the type of person who is embodied, fully in their integrity about the type of person they want to see more of in the world, who is consciously creating more healing experiences for the planet. This is very different from someone who posts an infographic on their Instagram story. Night and day. One is informational, coming from the mind, and one is embodied transformation that heals, that truly does move things in the right direction. Because that person who is plugged in and embodied and anchored into their truth, being a lighthouse for the rest of the world, their impact and reach is going to be massive. It's not even comparable. It's millions and millions of times more impactful than someone who comes from the mind, information, or attempting to, quote unquote, educate others. There are times and spaces where education matters and works and is applicable, But for a lot of the things that we're facing, that is not the most efficacious path to take. Let's be honest. If you were to walk up to any old person on the street and say, you know what? I know more than you. Let me educate you. They're going to want to tell you to fuck off. Truly. People aren't into that. It's outdated. That's why what I'm saying is, if you want to lead, you lead with energetics. If you want to have an impact, you need to become an embodiment of that truth. If you really want to effect change, you need to get your energy so on point and be so magnetic for all of the people and interactions and experiences that are going to cultivate more of an unfolding in that direction, that you become unstoppable. Then all of a sudden the impact that you have is massive. Talk is cheap. Information is cheap in 2021. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. People are being asked and called to go deeper into their practices, into their belief systems. And by belief systems, I don't mean of the mind. I mean the embodied practice of said beliefs. Because that is what will put people in their integrity. And integrity, when you can feel that from someone, you develop trust, you develop respect, you cultivate that in a community, and the snowball starts. A good one at that. So this is the energetic power of it all. The momentum that we want to generate has to be done with energetics. Otherwise, if you're just trying to do it with words, you're basically throwing rocks at the sun. Shout out to my dear friend Jeremiah for giving me that analogy years ago. But that's what it is. It's futile. Imagine throwing a rock at the sun. Visualize that. Here's another way to look at it. One of the things that was happening last year, and it broke my heart to watch, but there were a lot of people that were going around and intimidating others to pledge their allegiance to particular groups. And they were using intimidation, basically getting people to say something specific that they wanted them to say. And that's the equivalent of putting someone in a headlock and saying, say uncle, say uncle. How much change do you really think happens from that? It's going to turn people off. You're going to make enemies. People are not going to support that. People are going to get completely repelled and revolted from that type of behavior. Yet for whatever reason, there's a culture, like we could call it Twitter culture, that truly believe that by arguing from the mind in 160 character tweets, that they're changing the world from a place of being hostile and condescending. And to that, if you believe that that is where the work is done and that's how change is cultivated, I wish you the best of luck. So let's shift gears. One of the questions that I received on the heels of the last PTA episode was essentially, I hear you, I understand that I'm supposed to stay aligned, but I feel like I'm having to fight for other people's freedom. And once again, it's kind of like the throwing rocks at the sun thing. There are rare opportunities where you can really come in with a strong legal position, and there's an avenue to a resolution through a very big institution. Those opportunities do come, but when those opportunities come, they're really self-evident. It's something where it's like, oh yeah, jump on it right now. This is big. This is class action. This is going to make waves. Or if there's enough lawsuits, something can be done. Generally speaking, that is actually the path of least resistance when those opportunities come up. If you're not in one of those situations where you can find an avenue through an institution and it's aligned and done with integrity, The question then becomes, one, where are you coming from? Are you doing that thing where you're saying I'm anti-red and then you're still hitting the red target even though you want to aim at the green one? Is it something where you're arguing with information, which is cheap? It just can't be done in 2021. It needs to be done with embodiment, full integrity and alignment with your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions. So there's more than likely a disconnect from one of those pieces if you feel like I'm fighting, I'm in a battle. If you feel like you are in a battle, that tells me that you are creating enemies, because that's what that really means. Anytime you're in a war, that means you activate having enemies, and you do it more and more and more. So you can't say I'm activating enemies and activating more problems and creating a better future for other people. Those things don't exist together in the way that you think they do. They're actually in opposition of each other. A lot of people will point to specific periods in history where they're like, but there was this battle and that battle and this other battle. But that doesn't actually have anything to do with the actions that were taken, even though that's what was written in the history books. What was actually overriding was the current of the collective, the alignment of the collective moving in a pace that happened to sync up with a certain series of events. So while we read about battles, that's not what actually happened. What happened was alignment happened. And that's how things evolved and progressed and turned out however they turned out. It's just there happened to be wars along the way and bloodshed along the way and a lot of evacuation of souls along the way. That happened to happen. But the thing is, you can't create from negation. You can't do it. So that's why we really have to be conscious and intentional of where we're putting our energy, where we're steering the ship right now more than ever. The anti-shit doesn't work. The battle, the fighting, the struggling doesn't work. You have to focus in the direction of what is being created, what is desired, what is wanted, what needs to be embodied. You will get to where you want to go faster if you just aim at the green target. Aim at the green target. Do not entertain the red target. Don't look at the red target. It's just like when you're learning to ride a motorcycle, they tell you where you look is where you will drive. So you can't be looking at stuff that you don't want to hit because you're gonna go for that. That's exactly what is happening right now in terms of energetic current. Now, the advantage that every single one of you has by listening to this and understanding this is that most people are extremely sloppy, mentally speaking. Sloppy. They're not crisp and sharp and defined in their intentions and where they're focusing their energy and therefore gaining momentum. They're just not doing that. They're not being intentional with it. So, I think this is an Abraham Hicks quote. It's the one person who's tuned into source is more powerful than a million who aren't. This is why. Everyone is aiming at the not red target and hitting the red target. Whereas if you simply focus on the green one, you're going to get it. You're going to get it. It has no choice but to put you there. So I would ask, instead of fighting, you're not fighting for anything. It's important to align, embody, be in agreement, hold the vision, hold the conviction, be in certainty that the green target is where you will land and where we will move. Your experience is going to organize around that green target. So, in summary, here are the things that I would keep in mind. First, being anti or fighting the resistance against things actually grows the issue. You can't be anti. You have to exclusively focus on moving in the direction of what you desire. Because you can't be pro and anti at the same time, ironically enough. So you really, really, really want to clean that up more than anything else. As soon as you start drifting into I'm against that, that's bad, wrong, evil, you're sending your energy in the direction that you do not want. Let me also add here, obviously, there's a lot of people who talk about being anti all sorts of things. I'm not suggesting that you go out and correct them. Once again, don't be anti those people who blast from the rooftops about being anti this, that, and the other thing. Instead, lead by example, lead with conviction, truth, integrity, and embodiment. That's what you can do to have a much larger influence over people. And without words. This can be done without language. This is energetic. We're not even playing in the mental realm here other than using the mind in a constructive way. The mind is powerful, but we want to use it in a way that supports us rather than creates more issues. The next piece, you will not win in this life with information. That's outdated. It's archaic. It's done. It's old. A lot of people are still living under the paradigm and belief that information is king, and it's not. Information is one of the ways that you can have the least amount of impact, in my opinion, because it's just so accessible. It is so cheap. I'm not saying there aren't people with good information, but I would argue that information alone is kind of like pennies. It's the lowest currency that you can find. It's the cheapest, it's the least valuable when it comes to cultivating change. The most powerful and high value form of creating change on earth is going to be embodiment. Embodiment activates everything, including other people. Embodiment inspires others. Embodiment is something that magnetically pulls in new experiences into your field and cultivates a new reality. Embodiment is hands down the most sophisticated form of transformation that we can do for ourselves. And it's also what will transform others simply through osmosis of when someone else is in our field or anything of the like, talking to us in our energy in any capacity, it is transferable. I would even say, if you're wondering, well, is this podcast information? I would be the first person to say no. This podcast is not information. What I'm doing in this podcast is I am taking energetics, I am translating them in a way that's digestible and applicable to people, but I'm not giving you information. There's not any information that was shared. These are observations and energetics that are now filtering through the vessel, which we could call Sydney. So I'm the vessel and interpreter and disseminator of this energy. That's all that's really happening. I guess you could call it energetic information, but it's not mental information. It's not what I would say the scientific community understands as being information. That's not what I'm delivering here. This is energetics through this filter. If you like listening to me, what that really means is you gel with my work because you gel with my filter. You like the way that I bridge the energetics and communication. So that's more than likely why there's a certain resonance to this for you. I don't know why I needed to break that down so clearly, but I just wanted to make that really clear. Information is not what's dominant. We're talking about energetic principles are the fastest route to getting to where we all want to go, which is more than likely peace and harmony and unity and better feelings for people on the planet. I would say that is pretty consistent across the board, with the exception of maybe some sadists or some psychopaths and things like that. All right, my friends, that's all that I've got for you today. Don't forget, if you would like to work with me or you want to join a class or check out any of the good stuff that I have going on, go to onyxhealing.com. All of your dreams will come true at onyxhealing.com. And everything else, if you want to sign up for the newsletter, the link is in the description box or the show notes. And I have more good things coming for you. So stay tuned, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, a glowing review, a raving, fantastic, amazing, wonderful review if you feel inspired. And I will talk to you next time. Have a lovely, lovely week, everybody. Bye-bye. Week, everybody. Bye-bye. Week, everybody.